pretty egregious what's been happening to us the last few games. You know, a minus 31 free throw discrepancy. And I might be able to understand it if we were just chucking threes, but we're not. We're attacking the rim. And the disrespect right now for our team has been pretty unbelievable.
Stephanie White just did something that could end her coaching career, and honestly, it was about time someone had the guts to say it. The Indiana Fever head coach didn't just question a few bad calls after losing to the Las Vegas Aces in the playoffs. She straight up accused the referees of corruption and demanded a full investigation into what she called the most rigged officiating she'd ever witnessed. And you know what? The woman had receipts.
Right, and we had a couple of turnovers and a couple poor shots that led to runouts and led to runs. And I have to do a better job of using my timeout sooner.
White stood at that podium looking absolutely done with the nonsense. Her team had just been eliminated from the WNBA semifinals, but she wasn't talking about missed shots or turnovers. She was talking about a systematic pattern of corruption that made the game look more scripted than professional wrestling. The coach didn't dance around the issue or use coded language that officials usually hide behind when they're scared of getting fined.
Honestly, I mean, I thought it was obvious. You know, I felt like AB got one, had one going to the rim. They're in rotation. DB's was crazy. And, you know, we had, and then Lexi's, I felt like equally, you know, we talk about, you know, coming into the path, and it was an offensive player veering into the defensive player's path.
But here's where it gets absolutely wild. White threw out a number that made everyone's jaw drop. A minus 31 free throw disprepancy. That's not a typo. The Aces shot 31 more free throws than the Fever across the series. For perspective, that's basically an entire extra quarter's worth of free scoring opportunities handed to one team. White pointed out that her team wasn't just chucking three-pointers from the parking lot either. They were attacking the rim, driving hard to the basket, and getting absolutely hammered without a whistle in sight. The coach used one word that cut through all the diplomatic sports talk: disrespect.
We're attacking the rim, and the disrespect right now for our team has been pretty unbelievable. So it's disappointing.
She said the disrespect shown to her team had been unbelievable, and that word carried more weight than any technical breakdown of missed calls ever could. When a professional coach uses that kind of language in a press conference, you know something serious went down on that court. What makes this even more explosive is that coaches almost never do this. They know the cost of calling out referees publicly: fines, suspensions, league discipline, and basically painting a target on their back for every future game. Most coaches speak in riddles when they're mad about officiating, dropping hints that fans have to decode. White didn't bother with any of that political correctness. She looked directly into the cameras and essentially called the entire officiating crew corrupt.
Coach, you talked about the way that the game has been officiated for you guys. How did you see the foul that was not called, or a lack of foul, on the Bonner play, and then follow it up by Lexi Hull getting called for the foul?
I thought it was egregious.
The woman wasn't just protecting her players or venting frustration after a tough loss. She was putting her reputation and career on the line to expose what she believed was a fundamental threat to the integrity of professional basketball. White's demand for a league-wide investigation wasn't a suggestion or a polite request. It was a challenge thrown directly at the WNBA's feet, basically daring them to prove her wrong or admit there was a serious problem. Now let's dive into the evidence that had fans absolutely losing their minds on social media. That 31 free throw difference wasn't just a random bad luck streak. When you break down the actual footage from these games, the pattern becomes so obvious it's almost insulting to anyone with functioning eyeballs. The internet exploded with video compilations that made the officiating look more rigged than a carnival game. Fever players were getting absolutely demolished driving to the basket with no whistle, while Aces players were getting touch fouls called in their favor for breathing too hard near an opponent. One viral clip showed an Indiana guard getting knocked to the floor so hard she probably saw her ancestors, and the refs just kept playing like nothing happened. But wait, it gets even more ridiculous. Fans started doing side-by-side comparisons of identical plays where the Fever got called for fouls and the Aces got away with murder. We're talking about the same exact contact, same situation, completely different outcomes depending on which jersey the player was wearing. The evidence was so overwhelming that even people who hate the Fever were admitting something stunk worse than week-old fish. Social media turned into a crime scene investigation unit. Every questionable call got slowed down, analyzed frame by frame, game and posted with angry captions that would make a sailor blush. Hashtags questioning the fairness started trending faster than celebrity drama. Even neutral basketball analysts who usually avoid controversy were dropping hints that maybe, just maybe, something wasn't right with these games. Here's the kicker though, the officials themselves stayed quieter than a church mouse during prayer time. No explanations, no clarifications, no attempts to defend their calls. That silence only made fans angrier because when you can't defend your work, people start assuming the worst. And in this case, the worst was looking pretty darn likely. The replay reviews were somehow even more infuriating than the live calls. Refs would go to the monitor, look at obvious fouls in slow motion from multiple angles, and then come back with decisions that made absolutely no sense. It was like watching someone fail an open book test on purpose. The technology was supposed to help get calls right, but instead it became another tool for questionable decision making. What really sealed the deal was how consistent the inconsistency became. This wasn't random bad officiating that hurt both teams equally. The pattern was so clear you could set your watch to it. Fever drives hard, no call. Aces player gets touched, automatic whistle. It happened so often that fans started making drinking games out of predicting when the next phantom foul would get called. The social media evidence wasn't just angry fan reactions either. Former players, current analysts, and basketball experts all started posting their own breakdowns of the calls. When people who actually know the game inside and out are all saying the same thing, it stops being opinion and starts becoming fact. The real tragedy in all this mess is that some absolutely incredible basketball performances got completely buried under the avalanche of officiating drama. Lexi Hull was out there playing through an injury that would have sent most people straight to the emergency room, and instead of talking about her courage, everyone was arguing about referee conspiracies. Hull was supposed to be a question mark heading into this series. The injury had fans wondering if she'd even be effective on the court. Instead, she turned into a one-woman wrecking crew, hitting clutch shots when her team needed them most and diving for loose balls like her life depended on it. Every possession seemed to hurt, but she kept grinding through the pain and making plays that should have been instant classics. But here's what really got overshadowed. Aaliyah Boston put on a defensive clinic that deserved its own highlight reel. She was tasked with guarding A'ja Wilson, who's basically unstoppable on most nights, and the reigning MVP for good reason. Boston didn't just slow Wilson down, she made her look completely ordinary. We're talking about one of the worst shooting performances of Wilson's entire career. And it wasn't because Wilson suddenly forgot how to play basketball. Boston was cutting off driving lanes, contesting every shot, and playing the kind of suffocating defense that coaches dream about. She turned Wilson into a jump shooter and then made those jumpers as difficult as possible. The positioning, the timing, the pure basketball IQ on display should have been the story of the series. Instead, it became a footnote in a much uglier narrative. What makes this even more frustrating is that the Fever as a team showed the kind of heart that makes you believe in sports again. They refused to fold even when everything seemed to be working against them. The energy, the hustle, the way they picked each other up after every questionable call, it was the stuff that championship dreams are made of. These players were writing their own underdog story in real time. A young team that wasn't supposed to be here, fighting against the defending champions and refusing to back down. The unity they showed, the way they kept battling no matter what happened, should have been celebrated as one of the best playoff performances in recent memory. Instead, the conversation got hijacked completely. Vegas seemed to be playing a different game with different rules. Calls that would tighten up Indiana's offense mysteriously disappeared when the Aces had possession. The freedom that one team enjoyed compared to the handcuffs on the other was so obvious that even casual fans started noticing the difference. The momentum shifts weren't coming from great plays or tactical adjustments. They were coming from whistles that seemed to blow at the most convenient times for one particular team. That delicate balance that makes playoff basketball so electric was getting disrupted by officials who couldn't stay out of the spotlight. Hull's heroics became background noise. Boston's masterpiece got lost in the shuffle. The Fever's inspiring fight got drowned out by the sound of controversial whistles. What should have been a celebration of young talent proving they belonged on the biggest stage instead became a debate about whether the game was even being played fairly. Turns out this whole mess wasn't exactly breaking news for anyone who'd been paying attention to WNBA officiating this season. The Fever series was just the moment when all the frustration finally exploded in public, but the problems had been brewing for months. Like a pot of coffee, nobody remembered to turn off. Earlier in the season, the Minnesota Lynx and Washington Mystics got into their own officiating nightmare that had fans questioning whether the refs were watching the same game as everyone else. Mystics rookie Sonia Citron drove hard to the basket and got absolutely clobbered by DJI Carrington. The contact was so obvious that people in the cheap seats could see it without binoculars. But then came the plot twist that nobody saw coming. The refs initially called the foul, which made perfect sense because, you know, it was actually a foul. But then they decided to review the play, spent forever looking at multiple angles of obvious contact, and somehow concluded they'd made a mistake. They overturned their own correct call and left everyone scratching their heads, wondering what sport they were supposed to be watching. One fan perfectly captured the mood on social media, posting about how impossible it was to respect WNBA officials when they could go to instant replay and still miss calls that were clearer than a McDonald's sweet tea. The tweet spread faster than gossip in a small town, and thousands of people chimed in with their own horror stories about questionable officiating throughout the season. What made this pattern even more infuriating was the timing of when these controversial calls seemed to happen. They weren't random mistakes scattered throughout games. They showed up at the worst possible moments, right when momentum was shifting or during crucial possessions that could decide outcomes. It was like the officials had a sixth sense for when to make the most impact with their questionable decisions. Coaches had been dropping hints all season long, though most were careful not to cross the line that Stephanie White eventually sprinted across. They'd make comments about wanting consistency or hoping for fair treatment, but they usually stopped short of directly challenging the integrity of the officiating. The fines and league discipline that come with criticizing refs keep most coaches diplomatic even when they're steaming mad. Here's where it gets really interesting though. Players were getting increasingly bold about showing their frustration during games. Head shakes, eye rolls, and animated discussions with officials became more common as the season progressed. You could see the tension building in real time, with athletes who'd normally keep their composure starting to lose patience with calls that didn't make sense. The replay system that was supposed to help get things right became another source of controversy. Instead of clearing up obvious mistakes, it seemed to create new ones. Refs would look at clear footage of contact and somehow convince themselves they were seeing something different. The technology meant to improve accuracy was being used to justify decisions that looked worse in slow motion than they did live. Fan forums and social media became detective agencies, with people breaking down every controversial call and creating compilations that made the officiating look systematically biased. The evidence kept piling up week after week, building toward the explosion that finally happened during the Fever series. So what happens next is where things get really spicy. The WNBA finds itself sitting on a powder keg that could either blow up their credibility or force them to actually fix the mess they've created. Stephanie White didn't just complain about a few bad calls and move on. She demanded a full investigation that would either prove her right or end her coaching career in spectacular fashion. The league is in the middle of its biggest growth period ever, with new stars bringing record ratings and packed arenas that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Caitlin Clark and other rookies have turned the WNBA into must-watch television, bringing in fans who never cared about women's basketball before. But all that progress could disappear faster than free pizza at a college campus if people stop believing the games are legitimate. The problem is that trust is harder to build than a house of cards in a hurricane. Once fans start questioning whether outcomes are predetermined or influenced by officiating bias, that suspicion spreads like wildfire through social media. New viewers who just discovered the league don't have decades of loyalty to fall back on. If they think games are rigged, they'll just change the channel and never come back. White's demand for an investigation puts the WNBA in an impossible position. If they ignore her completely, they look like they're covering something up and don't care about competitive integrity. If they actually investigate and find problems, they have to admit their officiating has been compromised. If they investigate and find nothing wrong, they risk looking like they're protecting their own people while dismissing legitimate concerns. But here's the thing that makes this situation absolutely wild. The evidence isn't just coming from angry coaches and frustrated fans anymore. Former players, current analysts, and basketball experts are all pointing out the same patterns. When people who actually understand the game at the highest level are saying something's wrong, it becomes much harder to dismiss as sour grapes from losing teams. The financial implications are staggering too. Television deals, sponsorship agreements, and ticket sales all depend on fans believing they're watching authentic competition. If the WNBA's reputation gets damaged by officiating scandals, it could set women's professional basketball back years, just when it was finally gaining serious momentum. What makes White's position even more dangerous for the league is that she's not some random troublemaker looking for attention. She's a respected coach with a solid reputation who put everything on the line to make these accusations. That kind of credibility makes her demands much harder to ignore or brush off as emotional overreaction. The social media evidence keeps growing every day, with fans creating new compilations of questionable calls that make the officiating look increasingly suspicious. Each new video gets thousands of views and shares, spreading the controversy to people who might not have been paying attention before. The league can't just wait for this to blow over, because the internet never forgets. Whether White gets her investigation or not, she's already changed the conversation around WNBA officiating forever. Future games will be watched more closely, with fans and analysts looking for patterns that might have been ignored before. The scrutiny will be intense, and officials will know that every controversial call could become viral evidence of bias. If you're enjoying this content and want to see more deep dives into sports controversies, smash that subscribe button and let us know what topics you want us to cover next.